Hey everyone, Rowan here. Welcome to another supplemental. This is my loosely scripted show, something halfway between a podcast and a vlog. Today I wanted to talk about a criticism which is often levied at modern Star Trek shows. That is the criticism that shows like Discovery and Picard are far too dark. Now, I get this criticism, I can actually see where it's coming from, unlike other criticisms which are often thrown at Discovery, like the SJWs and things like that, which are just nonsense. This is one which I get where it's coming from, and I can kind of see where people are making this criticism from. Because in some cases, I actually agree with this criticism. I think there are places where Star Trek shows have gone too far a little bit. One example which is often brought up is Icheb's death in Star Trek Picard. It is a bit too grisly, you know. It is like his eye getting yanked out and everything and him screaming in pain. It's pretty grisly. And considering that there's not really anything else in Star Trek Picard which is as violent as that, it definitely sticks out as an outlier. Another point which I thought Discovery went too far in Season 1 was the Klingon sexy times. I never really needed to see a Klingon naked and thrusting and screaming, but it was there, and again, I just thought it was not really needed. But what I'm talking about here is kind of personal preference. You know, some people just don't like gore, and they just don't like excessive violence. And if that's you, then again, that's just a totally legitimate standpoint. Some people just say, I don't like that. I'd prefer if it wasn't as gory or wasn't as violent. You know, that's totally a legitimate criticism. It's a personal preference, but it's one that makes sense, you know? A lot of people take this criticism a little bit further, and they say that because of this more explicit material and violence and so on, and because of the darkness, that it has ruined the concept of Star Trek having a hopeful future. You know, Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek partly to depict a future where humankind is united and equal, and we've put our sort of violent instincts behind us, and, you know, we don't go to war with each other over resources anymore, and we're equal, and it's a fair society, and we're advanced, and our mission now is to explore space and better ourselves, and so on and so forth. And having violence like this, and explicit material and so on, is ruining that future, and it's now depicting the Star Trek future as being an excessively dark future, and it's ruined that idea, and that, I think, is wrong. Again, I get it if it's a personal preference thing. If you just don't like gore, fair enough. But I think that it's inaccurate to say that Star Trek has never been violent before. I think the main thing which stopped previous Trek shows from being as violent or as explicit as Discovery and Picard is not that the writers or the creative teams decided that wasn't in Star Trek's sort of ethos, but it was really just the broadcast standards of the day. If you look into the production of Deep Space Nine, there are numerous instances where Ira Steven Behr and other creatives wanted to push things much, much further than they ended up being in Deep Space Nine. You know, Deep Space Nine is, if you look at it compared to TNG and Voyager and so on, is a much, much darker Star Trek show than the others, and it really tackles subject matter which is much heavier and grim and dark than TNG and Voyager ever did. And I think the creative team really wanted to actually go even further than they did, but because they were on a network show, they couldn't go as violent or as explicit as perhaps they wanted to do. But again, that's not really a way to assuage this criticism, you know, saying, but writers of the past want to do it, you know. But I think there's a difference here between content and the overall message. Discovery and Picard have had gore in them, but the gore is not the point. The darkness is in service of a larger story and a larger plan. You know, it's not just there for the sake of being edgy. So, while Discovery and Picard can be grim at times, if you look at the story and the themes and the message they're actually trying to communicate, it's still hopeful and it's still optimistic. For example, Discovery basically sets up a redemption arc for its main character, Burnham. You know, the theme of Discovery's first season is all about how do you maintain your morals and your values and your integrity in times of crisis. You know, there's characters like Gabriel Lorca in Discovery, who say, we can't focus on science anymore, we've got to be militaristic, we've got to be soldiers, I've got to turn you scientists into soldiers, because we're in dark times, we're in a war for our very lives, we can't, waste time sort of getting all bureaucratic and about ethics and all that kind of stuff, we've just got to survive. And at first Burnham is kind of tempted by that, but then we reveal that Lorca's from a parallel dimension and he's part of the Terran Empire and so on and so forth. And by the end, Burnham makes, a whole speech to Starfleet Command after herself and crewmates have been awarded medals and things, where she says, no, you shouldn't sacrifice your morality and your values and your ethics just because there's a crisis on. Discovery basically says Federation ideals and Federation morals and values are always worth sticking to. Peace first and equality and so on and so forth should always be adhered to, no matter what, even in the most desperate of circumstances. So the first season of Discovery concludes with, a statement, not that you should just throw off morals and throw off, ideals when it suits you if the situation calls for it. It actually says the exact opposite. And the times when the characters have gone wrong is when they give in to darker impulses and when they try and take the easy route out. That's when things go wrong for the characters. When things go right for the characters, it's when they stick to their guns and when they stand by Federation ideals. So while there is darkness in there and while they do get into desperate situations, that's the low point which they then rise out of. And a lot of people have pointed to Discovery Season 3 as well and said that, well, they've destroyed the Federation. The idea of a hopeful future is now gone. But again, that's not really true. If you look at the story which is being told, the destruction of the Federation and so on and so forth, that's, again, the low point. The characters, they say in the opening 2 episodes, their hope is really all they have left. Season 3 is making a statement that although the world may seem dark, you should still absolutely fight for a better future. Previous Star Trek shows like Star Trek in the 1960s and so on, it gave you the optimistic future that had already been established. It said, we've already got past our differences, we've already overcome these obstacles, we're already equal, and all that. Discovery Season 3 is basically showing you how a future like that is going to be built. It's these characters who are driven by a determination to make the world around them better. The arc of Season 3 is all about trying to transform the world around these characters to make it into a hopeful, more equal, more peaceful, more prosperous world. Which, far from ruining the hopeful, optimistic future of Star Trek, actually encourages it and sort of gives you a stronger drive to achieve that kind of stuff. Now, if we look at Star Trek Picard, again, despite its grim moments, JeanLuc Picard is basically held up in that show as the absolute paragon of Federation values and Starfleet ethics, because he is, from TNG, he's just like the guy, it's kind of, he should be running the place, because he's just such a great, virtuous person. The whole arc of Star Trek Picard is that he comes back into the fold. He gets back out there in space because he knows that he can do good. He sees Starfleet and the Federation as having lost its way and stumbled. He even says, Starfleet wasn't acting like Starfleet when it banned synthetics and androids and so on. And the whole arc of that season is everyone should probably listen to Picard because he's the guy that is like, no, this was an absolute mistake. Banning synthetics was wrong from the very beginning. We shouldn't have given up on the Romulans. We should have saved them because that's what we do. We are the Federation. We are Starfleet. That is what we do. And, you people are betraying all these values by acting this way. And he's proven absolutely right by the end of the first season. He saves the synths and he outs the Tal Shiar influence in Starfleet. And, so he basically browbeats the Federation and Starfleet into acting the way they should. So again, while there is darkness, while there was a synthetic ban at the beginning, and while, the Romulans do hate the Federation for kind of betraying them and leaving them for dead, the show knows that. The show isn't telling the viewer that those are good things, that the Federation was right to do that. It's saying the exact opposite. Its main character, JeanLuc Picard, is telling the characters and the organizations in the Star Trek universe and the viewers themselves that acting the way that they have been acting is wrong, and we should return to Federation ideals and return to Starfleet ideals, and he wins out at the end. While I do understand people kind of getting antsy about violence and grim subject matter and more explicit, darker material and so on, that's not the point of the stories being told here. Those are just components in the storytelling. If Star Trek Discovery and Picard and so on had said the opposite, like if Discovery ended with Burnham saving the day by betraying Federation values and by betraying Starfleet ethics and winning at the end, and the music swelling and all that kind of stuff, then yeah, that would be wrong, because that would be a Star Trek show telling you, hey, those morals you have, the values that you have, that you hold yourself to, don't worry about them. If they become inconvenient in times of crisis, just put them to the side and then continue on once you've won. If the show was saying that, then yes, that would be a complete, wrong take on Star Trek. But that's not what Star Trek Discovery said. If Jean-Luc Picard, at the end of Star Trek Picard's first season, came around and realized, you know what, Federation, and you were right to ban synthetics. Actually they are very dangerous people inherently, and we shouldn't put up with them. We should make sure that they're taken out. And those Romulans, we were right to leave them. But he doesn't say that. He says the exact opposite. And that's the message of the show. And that's why, despite the dark elements and the kind of the grisliness and the violence and so on and so forth, ultimately the messages of both of these shows are still hopeful and still optimistic. Now, a lot of this in modern Star Trek shows, some people would ask, well, the Federation and Starfleet and so on, they should never have been depicted as failing or betraying their values, and they should have just been good from the beginning, because that's where we've got to, and that's, we should be beyond that. And to that I would say, well, it doesn't make particularly good drama when everyone in organizations and individuals are just completely infallible 100% of the time. But also, these modern Star Trek shows are reflecting the times, just as the 1960s show was a response to a lot of the social and political upheaval at that time. These shows are responding to the social and political upheaval of today. And oh no, I'm going to bring up politics right now. That's the subject of a whole other video. But a lot of people are feeling betrayed by big institutions. A lot of people have lost faith in their governments. A lot of people are seeing leaders betraying the values and the principles that they're supposed to be adhering to. And so it makes sense that these shows are responding to this. Because a lot of people see us as being in very dark times right now. I mean, there's global warming, there's obviously a pandemic going on right now, and there's all sorts of other, societal problems and issues which are being brought to the surface, which, Discovery is trying to address and say, hey, even though these are very dark times, don't lose your head, don't lose your ideals. These are things which are absolutely worth fighting for. Keep going. Star Trek Discovery is trying to impart hope in the face of hopelessness. And that's absolutely, the core and the heart of Star Trek. And Star Trek Picard is basically, putting governments and organizations and so on, and, putting them to rights and saying, hey, stop being giant assholes. Stop demonizing large groups of people for the actions of a few, Don't give up on people just because of some political, crap, Star Trek Picard and Discovery are reacting to things which are happening in the world right now. And that makes sense, because Star Trek has literally always done that. So while modern Star Trek does feature violence and does feature other explicit material in forms which Star Trek hasn't had them before, that doesn't at all ruin the concept of a hopeful future. The violence and the darkness is not the point of any of the stories being told here. The point of the stories is, despite all this darkness, we can still prevail and there is still hope. And I think that is, not just not betraying Star Trek and not just not ruining the concept of a hopeful future, but actually distilling it and embodying it better than perhaps other Trek movies and other installments in the franchise have done before. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on new uploads. If you want to help the channel grow, join me over on Patreon or join my YouTube members, where you can see videos early as well as other benefits. Until next time, have a good one, and as always, live long and prosper.